Henry Drake wasn't the type to enjoy social gatherings. As a meticulous data analyst, he felt most at ease surrounded by charts and algorithms, preferring the solitude of his office to the clamor of parties. His coworkers marveled at his ability to immerse himself in work, which acted as both a sanctuary and a cage. Henry's corner office was crowded with graphs and predictive models, showcasing his intellectual prowess while shielding him from the emotional scars he still carried. Years had passed since Henry had willingly attended a social event, his reluctance rooted in the lingering pain of a broken engagement. Even so, his friend Ed, ever persuasive and charming, had begun to wear him down with relentless invitations to a party. Ed believed that a night out might help Henry loosen up and reconnect with the world beyond spreadsheets. The party was bustling with life. Young professionals in their 20s and 30s, dressed in trendy yet relaxed outfits, played billiards, laughed over drinks, danced to the music, and crowded around the TV. In one corner stood a lanky man with curly dark hair and a cheerful face, glancing nervously at a red-headed woman who was visibly intoxicated. The man shifted awkwardly and asked her, "So, this is a date now?" The redhead shrugged and replied, "Yeah, sure." He hesitated before continuing, "Can we take your car?" "I probably shouldn't drive." While his eyes scanned the room, he added quickly, "Actually, I need to find Henry. Can you text me later?" The redhead raised her eyebrows. "Henry Drake? He actually showed up? I thought he disappeared off the face of the earth." The man, whose name was Ed, sighed and said, "Yeah, I talked him into it, but now I can't find him." At that moment, a blonde woman walked past, and Ed turned toward her sharply. "Hey, Laura," he called. The blonde glanced at him, smirking. "Is that beer for me?" she asked. Ed groaned in frustration and waved her question away. "Have you seen Henry?" "I went to grab a drink, and now I've lost him," he asked. Laura gestured vaguely toward a nearby room. "He was in the entertainment room about 15 minutes ago." Ed snorted. "You'd love that, wouldn't you, Laura?" She rolled her eyes. "I just want him to have a good time," she replied. Ed turned back to the redhead. "Text me later, okay? I've got to find him." She gave an exaggerated pout but nodded. Ed shoved his way through the crowded apartment and stepped into the entertainment room, where a dozen guests lounged on couches, watching a music video. He approached a cheerful, heavy-set man swaying in time with the beat. "Hey, Grant, have you seen Henry?" Ed asked. Grant nodded and replied, "Yeah, he was here a minute ago." Ed pressed, "Where'd he go?" Grant shrugged. "He just got up and left. Walked out the front door." Confused, Ed asked, "Why? What happened?" Grant scratched his head. "No idea. We put on a movie, and he just bolted." Suspicious, Ed demanded, "What movie?" Grant answered, "The Graduate. We got to the end of, the wedding scene." Ed's face darkened with frustration. "You showed a movie where the bride runs off with another guy? And Henry sat through that?" "You're an idiot," he snapped. Henry lay on his side, gazing at Layla Carter as she slept. Her straw-colored hair stirred faintly with each breath, and though she wasn't traditionally stunning, the sunlight streaming through the window illuminated her pale skin, giving her an ethereal beauty in his eyes. Henry's life had been marked by success. He was an all-star athlete and academic achiever in high school, graduated with top honors in finance and statistics, and steadily climbed the corporate ladder at a prestigious firm. Yet despite all of his achievements, he had never felt truly content until he met Layla. Unlike his past relationships, which had been shallow and fleeting, his connection with her was authentic and fulfilling. Their love story had culminated on a warm summer evening when Henry proposed to Layla at a lakeside park. With a tearful smile, she said yes. Over the past 8 months, they had worked tirelessly to plan their wedding, arranging invitations, fittings, and a ceremony at the church in Layla's hometown, set to take place in just 6 days. As they drove along I-90 toward her childhood home, the conversation flowed easily between them, accompanied by the occasional sound of Layla typing updates to her friends and family. After a while, however, she fell quiet, her gaze fixed on the rolling countryside outside the car window. Concerned, Henry asked, "Is everything okay, sweetheart? Did something go wrong with the caterer?" Layla shook her head and smiled faintly. "No, nothing like that. I was just thinking about some of the baggage I left behind at home." Henry frowned. "Baggage? What kind of baggage?" he asked. After a moment of hesitation, she replied, "It's just some old friends and family. They're not exactly thrilled about me getting married." Henry's brow furrowed. "But I thought your family liked me." "We got along great when they visited," he said. "My parents adore you," she reassured him. "But a few friends and distant relatives, they think I should be with someone else." Henry tensed. "Someone else? Who?" Layla sighed deeply. "It's about Eric," she admitted quietly. Henry's jaw clenched, but his voice was calm. "Eric? That's ancient history. Why is it even coming up?" he asked. She explained, "Some people still see us as the perfect couple and think I should give him another chance. They think he's changed." Henry's hands tightened on the wheel. "So, am I supposed to be competing with your ex a week before our wedding?" She shook her head, frustrated. "No. That's not what I meant. I just wanted to warn you that people like Brittany might say things or make it awkward." Henry raised an eyebrow. "Brittany? Isn't she one of your bridesmaids? Why would you ask someone who doesn't support our marriage to stand in the wedding?" he asked incredulously. Layla sighed again. "She's my oldest friend. I was in her wedding, and I didn't want to leave her out." Henry exhaled slowly, then softened. "Layla, I'm in this for us. As long as we stick together, nobody else's opinion matters. Let them think what they want, I'll handle it." Relieved, she leaned against his shoulder, and they continued the drive. As they pulled into the driveway of her childhood home, a cozy two-story farmhouse on the edge of town, her mother ran out to greet them with open arms. "Layla, my beautiful bride-to-be," she exclaimed, hugging her tightly before turning to Henry. "And Henry, you're as handsome as ever." She gave him a warm hug and ushered them inside. Layla's father greeted them quietly, offering a firm handshake and a welcoming nod. Over a hearty dinner of pork chops and mashed potatoes, wedding details dominated the conversation. When the subject of seating came up, Layla's mother hesitated. "Henry, is your dad still flying in on Thursday?" she asked. "Yeah," he replied. "He'll be here in time for the rehearsal dinner that evening." Her face fell. "Oh, Henry, I'm so sorry. The country club had a mix-up, and we had to move the dinner to Wednesday." Henry laughed with relief. "That's not a problem. My dad avoids public gatherings whenever possible, and he'll be fine on Saturday. Everything will work out," he assured her. Layla's mom let out a long sigh, her shoulders relaxing as the tension eased. "Are you sure, Henry? I don't want anyone feeling left out," she asked again. "I'm positive. He'll be fine," Henry replied with a warm smile. Then he tilted his head. "But what party on Thursday are you talking about? I don't remember anything being planned." "Well," Layla's mom began, "isn't your best man, Ed, organizing something? A bachelor party?" Henry nodded. "Oh, right, I think so. I asked him to keep it low-key since most of my friends aren't arriving until Saturday. Just a small get-together." Henry turned to Layla and her mom. "I guess Layla's having a bachelorette party too." Her mom nodded eagerly. "Yes, Brittany is organizing it. She's so excited, lots of Layla's high school friends will be there," she said with obvious enthusiasm. Henry smiled at her energy but couldn't help noticing Layla's uneasy expression. He felt a flicker of discomfort himself. By the time the rehearsal dinner came around, Henry was already counting the hours until it was over. For 2 days, he had felt like a spectacle for Layla's old friends. The real trouble, though, was Brittany, an assertive, striking woman who took control of every conversation, steering wedding plans and social chatter. Worse, she had roped Eric, Layla's ex-boyfriend, into some of the events. Eric, a smooth-talking country guy, became the focal point of countless anecdotes from Layla's past. One particular story about Eric taking Layla to prom in a horse-drawn carriage set Henry on edge. Layla flushed with embarrassment while Eric basked in the attention, leaving Henry feeling nauseous. The other women at the table chimed in, praising the memory, and Henry felt increasingly isolated. He looked longingly at Layla's parents, seated at another table, wishing he had joined them instead. "I'm sorry. I think they got a bit carried away." The voice was soft, nearly lost amid the noise. Henry turned to see a plump woman with curly brown hair and a crooked smile speaking to him. "What?" he asked, startled. She nodded toward Brittany. "I'm sorry she took over. She knows everyone here so well and probably didn't mean to leave you out." Henry felt a small wave of relief and smiled. Yeah, I get it. It's just hard, I don't know the stories, and my mind's on the wedding, he said. She smiled back. Of course. I'm Valerie Caldwell. We met at the mall yesterday. Henry nodded. Yes, I remember, he said politely. As they chatted, Henry heard his name called from across the table. He turned toward Brittany, who was visibly annoyed. I'm sorry, what did you say? He asked. Brittany huffed. I asked if you could tell us about your work. Layla thought you'd prefer to explain it yourself. Caught off guard, Henry stammered, I analyze and compile economic models to help firms make investment decisions. Blank stares greeted him. Clear as mud, Eric joked, drawing some laughs. Henry glanced at Layla, who gave him an encouraging smile. He cleared his throat and tried again. I help companies figure out what products to launch or stocks to invest in by evaluating market trends. This drew a few polite nods, but the conversation grew awkwardly quiet. Feeling the need to break the silence, Henry turned to Eric. So, Eric, Layla tells me you work at a Ford dealership. Do you enjoy the job? Eric's demeanor stiffened. Yeah, it's a good job. I like it, he said cautiously. So, you're in sales? Henry asked. Eric's tone turned defensive. No, I'm not a salesman. I'm one of the managers, he replied sharply. The table fell silent, and Henry realized he had misstepped. I'm sorry, I didn't mean anything by it, he said quickly. Eric shrugged. It's fine, he muttered, though the tension lingered. Later, in Layla's bedroom, the couple rehashed the evening. What was with Eric's reaction to my question about his job? Henry asked, leaning against the bedpost. Layla thought for a moment. Eric's got some baggage. It's not your fault he blew up, she explained. Henry frowned. So, you're saying it's my fault? I wasn't trying to upset him, I was just making conversation. Layla gently stroked his cheek. No, it's not your fault. Eric's always been the big man in town, but life didn't go the way he planned after high school. He didn't get the scholarship, the job, or, she hesitated. Or the girl he wanted. Henry interrupted, his frustration clear. Layla raised her eyebrows. Henry, please don't get mad. You don't have to compete for me. Henry sighed. It's hard not to feel like I do. It's driving me crazy. When Eric showed up with that girl, it felt like he was trying to make you jealous, and it looked like it worked. He hasn't gotten over you, has he? Layla pressed her lips together thoughtfully before responding. Eric and I were together for a long time, high school through a couple of years after graduation. We even planned to get married. But things fell apart. He didn't want college or a white-collar job, and I did. He got jealous, started spying on me, and it ended with a big fight. I took off the ring and told him to leave me alone. Henry nodded. And that was it. We talked a bit after that, but it wasn't the same. I moved on, met you, and here we are. Eric's just an old friend now. It's you and me, Henry. She hugged him tightly, but as Layla drifted off to sleep, Henry lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The next day, Henry, his father Simon, and Ed sat together at the only bar in town that served food. Simon, stout and weathered, leaned back in his chair, listening as Henry recounted the rehearsal dinner. What a freak, Simon said loudly, reaching for his beer. He sounds like a real piece of work. Ed chuckled as he took a bite of his burger. Henry shrugged. Maybe, but you didn't miss much, Dad. Yeah, I guess so, Simon said, finishing his fries. I'd probably embarrass myself anyway, so it's just as well. Henry began to object, but Simon waved him off. It's okay, Henry. This, he gestured to the bar, this is more my speed. Henry sipped his beer and nodded. Yeah, I'm okay with that too, Dad. Better than last night. Simon gave his son a sidelong glance. Is this really all you wanted for your bachelor party? A few hours in a sports bar with your old man and Ed? No dancing girls? Henry shook his head. No, Dad. Even if I wanted that, this is a small town, rumors would spread. I wouldn't want to start my marriage off wrong. Simon nodded. Yeah, I get it, he said, taking another bite of his burger. The three men spent another hour talking, joking, and watching a soccer game before calling it a night. As Henry drove Simon to his hotel, the older man fidgeted in the passenger seat. Finally, he broke the silence. "Big day on Saturday, son. Are you ready?" Henry glanced at his father briefly. "I'm ready, Dad. I can't wait to marry Layla and start our family." Simon's voice softened. "You'll be great, son. Much better than I was." "Dad, no," Henry began, but Simon cut him off. "It's true. Your mom and I split when you were 3, and I barely saw you after that. Then you had to live with me after her accident." Simon's voice broke, and Henry saw him wipe his eyes. "I'm happy for you, son. Happy you found someone you truly love." Henry pulled into the hotel parking lot and stopped the car. "Dad, I'm glad you're here too. I couldn't have done it without you," he said earnestly. Simon turned to his son, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry for how things were after your mom passed. I could barely take care of myself, let alone you. But I loved having you around, watching you work so hard and succeed. You deserve to marry a great woman, and I'm proud of you, son." "Damn proud," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Henry, unable to hold back his tears, rested a hand on his father's shoulder. They sat quietly for a moment, the bond between them unspoken but strong, before Simon stepped out and headed to his room. Brittany Mitchell's parents owned the grandest home in Newbury, a sprawling mansion. That evening, the house was filled with laughter as a dozen women lounged in the living room, sharing wine and stories. Layla, the bride-to-be, was at the center of the excitement, opening gifts and joining in the laughter. The evening took a raucous turn when a slightly drunken suggestion to model some of the lingerie gifts sparked a loud debate. Blushing and hesitant, Layla initially refused but eventually gave in, choosing the least revealing baby doll outfit she could find. Taking her time to put it on, she nervously stepped into the hallway. The women erupted into cheers and applause that echoed like the uproar of a rowdy bar. Though embarrassed, Layla managed a few shy poses, her cheeks burning as the group egged her on. Brittany, clearly tipsy, yelled, "Show us another one, Layla. Let's see another outfit." Encouraged, the others joined in, but Layla stood firm, politely shaking her head and retreating back to the bedroom amidst groans of disappointment. As she changed back into her clothes, a knock at the front door was followed by Brittany's shrill laughter. 3 men entered carrying bottles of champagne and vodka. Brittany ushered them in, leading Aaron Smith and Tom Jenkins to reunite with their girlfriends. The third man, Eric Daniels, casually asked Brittany where Layla was, saying he had something for her. Brittany replied that she was changing and would be out soon. With a sly grin, Eric began organizing the group to sing the school fight song for her. Layla, hearing the commotion and assuming it was another game, decided to join in the fun. She burst into the room giggling, only to freeze at the sight of the 3 men. The women pointed frantically toward them, but the damage was done. Aaron and Tom looked stunned, while Eric clapped and grinned broadly. Mortified, Layla fled back to the bedroom, where she stayed for half an hour until Brittany convinced her to return. By then, most of the guests had left, leaving just a handful of women sipping their drinks. Eric, still lounging on the couch, waved casually as Layla entered. Reluctantly, she sat beside him, covering her face with her hands. "That was so humiliating. I can't believe it happened," she groaned. Eric chuckled, patting her back. "If it makes you feel better, I'll never forget it either." "Wish I had a camera," he teased. Layla glared at him but couldn't help laughing. "Someone should have warned me," she muttered. Eric shrugged. "Surprises are my secret weapon. Look how much I'd miss out on without them," he said with a grin. They reminisce about old times until Layla decides to head home. Brittany tried to escort her, but Eric insisted on driving her instead. During the ride, they chatted casually about mutual friends and past events. However, a few blocks from Layla's house, Eric suddenly pulled over near a hedge. "What are we doing here?" Layla asked warily. "I have something for you," Eric said, pulling out a small wooden box. Layla shook her head. "No, Eric. I'm getting married in 2 days." "This isn't right," she protested. "Just open it. Please," he urged. Cautiously, Layla opened the box and gasped. Inside was a delicate opal pendant on a gold chain. "I've been searching for this for years," she whispered. "I drained the pond 2 years ago and found it in the mud," Eric explained softly. Her hands trembled as she held the necklace. "Why did you wait until now?" she asked, her voice distant. I hoped we might have another chance, but when you got engaged, I knew that wasn't happening. I just wanted to give it to you before the wedding, he said earnestly. Layla tried to fasten the chain, but her shaking fingers fumbled. Here, let me, Eric offered, his voice barely above a whisper. As he secured the pendant, Layla stared at it, tears welling up in her eyes. I love you. I've always loved you, Eric confessed. No, you haven't, she said firmly, pulling away. I'm getting married, Eric. I can't do this. She stumbled out of the car and ran toward her house without looking back. 12 hours later, Layla stood on a stool in her living room, wearing her wedding dress as her mother adjusted the hem. You're quiet today. Are you all right? Her mother asked. Layla sighed. Yes, Mom, I'm fine, she replied. You don't seem fine. Is everything okay with Henry? Her mother pressed. Layla's eyes widened in panic. Of course. Why would he be upset? Did he say something? She asked quickly. No, but maybe he's annoyed we made him stay somewhere else last night. He can sleep here if it's an issue, her mom suggested. Layla shook her head, absently fingering the opal pendant. No, Mom, he's fine with it. Henry's a good guy, she said quietly. Mrs. Carter's eyes narrowed as she noticed the necklace. What's that? Did Henry give it to you? Layla hesitated before answering. No, Eric did. It's the pendant he gave me for my 16th birthday. He found it after I lost it in the pond, she explained. Her mother stepped back, hands on her hips. You're accepting gifts from an old boyfriend right before your wedding? Layla mirrored her mother's stance defensively. It's different, Mom. He found it and gave it back to me last night. Mrs. Carter frowned. It's still a gift from someone who cares for you, and it's dangerous to bring that into your marriage. Henry's a good man. Don't let an old flame ruin what you have. Layla sighed. Why do you hate Eric so much? Everyone loves him except you. Her mother softened. I like Eric, but he doesn't share your dreams. He's charming but lacks the ambition to build a stable life. I want you to be happy. If you'd chosen Eric, I'd have supported you, but I'm glad you picked Henry. He'll take care of you and give you the life you want, she explained gently. Layla nodded, though her fingers lingered on the pendant. I know, Mom. Henry's wonderful, and I love him. It's just, being home and seeing Eric again has stirred up old feelings. It's hard to bury the past, she admitted. I understand, her mom said with a sympathetic smile. But tomorrow, you're marrying a great man who deserves your full heart. Don't forget that. That night, Layla lay awake for hours, restless. A faint sound drifted into her room, music. At first, it was barely audible, but it grew louder. Curious, she got up and peeked outside. On the lawn, 5 musicians played I Can't Help Falling in Love with You. Thinking it was a prank, Layla laughed and opened her window to shoo them away, but then she froze. Sitting on the porch roof was Eric, humming along with a wide grin. Her father's voice called out from downstairs. Layla, what's all that noise? It's just some guys playing music, Dad. I'll chase them off, she called back. Well, it's past midnight. I'll handle it, he said, getting up. Panicked, Layla hissed, Eric, hide. With no place to go, Eric gestured helplessly. Quick, come here, she said, motioning him inside. Eric climbed through the window, grinning. Hey, Layla. Fancy seeing you here. Trying to stay stern, Layla failed to suppress a laugh. God, Eric, you're going to get me in so much trouble. Unfazed, he smiled. With an angel face like that, you'll get out of it. He noticed the pendant around her neck. You're wearing it, he said softly. Yes, it's a lovely gesture, thank you. Is that all we are, Eric? Friends? Layla asked softly. Eric's eyes met hers. I love you, Layla, he said earnestly. She closed her eyes and whispered, I love you too. When Layla woke up, Eric was beside her, snoring quietly. Her mother's voice came through the door. Layla, it's time to get up. Panic set in as Layla slapped Eric awake and pressed a hand over his mouth, motioning frantically toward the door. Layla, did you hear me? Her mother called again. Yes, Mom. I'll be right out, Layla replied, trying to sound calm. I'll set your dress on your bed, Mrs. Carter offered her hand on the doorknob. Wait, Mom. Layla shouted, hurriedly wrapping her nightgown around herself. "Don't come in, I've got really bad gas." "What?" "Don't be silly," her mother said, starting to open the door. Layla threw herself against the door, desperate. "Seriously, Mom, it's awful." "I'll come downstairs to get dressed," she babbled, shooting a glare at Eric, who was fumbling around for his pants. She hissed, "Leave. Now." Eric nodded, grabbing his clothes and climbing out the window in his boxers. Layla kept talking loudly about the toxic atmosphere until she was sure Eric was gone. Then, composing herself, she opened the door with a nervous smile. "Okay, Mom, you can come in. But I warned you." Mrs. Carter stepped inside, sniffing the air suspiciously. "It smells fine in here," she said, puzzled. Layla laughed nervously. "Really? Must be my wedding nerves." "Yeah, maybe," her mother replied, still unconvinced. Later, Layla sat in her wedding dress, staring out the window. Mrs. Carter entered the room, holding a pair of jeans and a wallet. "Layla, I found these under your bed. Do you want to talk?" Layla's composure broke, and she burst into tears. "Oh, Mom, what am I going to do?" Her mother took her hands gently. "Layla, who do you want? That's all that matters." Layla's voice trembled. "I feel torn. Everything with Henry feels right, but I can't let go of Eric." Mrs. Carter wiped a tear from her daughter's cheek. "No matter what, you have my love and support. But you have to decide." In the groom's room, Henry's excitement turned to worry when he saw Layla's distressed face. "Layla, what's wrong?" he asked, stepping forward. She raised a hand to stop him. "Henry, we need to talk," she said, her voice breaking. Her mother gently guided Ed out of the room, leaving the two of them alone. "Of course, sweetheart." "Tell me what's wrong," Henry said, his concern deepening. With tears in her eyes, Layla spoke quietly. "Henry, I have bad news. I can't marry you. I love you, but I can't do this." Henry tried to reassure her. "If you're having doubts, we can wait. There's no rush." Layla shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, Henry. I can't marry you, ever. It would be a mistake. I'm so sorry." Henry pleaded, but Layla handed him her ring with trembling hands, sobbing as she turned and fled the room, tripping over her dress on the way out. Simon Drake stood in the church foyer when chaos broke out. He saw Mrs. Carter speaking gravely to Ed as nearby guests whispered furiously, spreading gossip through the crowd. Ed's conversation with Mrs. Carter ended abruptly, his face red with frustration as he marched back to the groom's room. Simon intercepted him. "Ed, what's going on?" Ed shook his head in disgust. "It's off," he muttered. "Wait, what?" "That can't be," Simon replied, following him to the room. His doubts disappeared when Henry emerged, disheveled and tearful. "Oh my God, son. What happened?" Simon asked, horrified. Henry could only shake his head, unable to speak. Suddenly, Eric burst into the church, half-dressed, and approached a woman, asking urgently where Layla was. She pointed toward the reception hall, and Eric rushed off. Enraged, Simon followed and found Eric kneeling before Layla, who was still in her wedding dress, smiling through her tears. Simon's anger boiled over. "What is this? My son's heart is broken because of this loser," he shouted. The crowd turned to watch as Layla began crying again. Eric rose to face Simon, but Mr. Carter quickly stepped between them. "Is it true?" "Is this?" Simon's words were cut off when Mr. Carter punched him squarely in the face. Simon staggered back, wiping blood from his lip, his expression turning brutal. He advanced on Mr. Carter, but Henry's voice stopped him. "Dad. No. It's not worth it," Henry said firmly, his tone exhausted. Simon froze, his anger dissolving into calm. Ed led him away, but Henry lingered, looking at Layla with a mixture of pain and resignation. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out the wedding ring and tossed it toward her. It clinked as it hit the tile floor, landing near her feet. "Goodbye, Layla," he said bitterly before walking out, his steps heavy like a condemned man. Henry sat hunched over in his small apartment, staring blankly out the window. He stood, stretched, and walked past the empty spaces where memories of her used to linger. 1,000 days, he muttered, glancing at the unmade bed, evidence of another sleepless night. He stripped off his workout clothes, showered, shaved, and put on his usual dark suit and tie. 1,000 damn days, he repeated, heading to his car. The drive brought back memories of that terrible day, the walk from the church to the car, supported by his father and Ed, his mind numb from the shock. His father had driven, offering words of comfort, but Henry had barely heard him. Now, he pulled into the parking garage of Prairie Tower and took the elevator to the 42nd floor. In his corner office, he greeted the janitors and settled at his desk, switching on his computer. The office had become his sanctuary, a place where numbers and graphs drowned out thoughts of betrayal and heartbreak. At Ed's insistence, he had gone on 5 awkward dates, all of which ended poorly. Concluding he wasn't ready for romance, Henry retreated into his work, avoiding human interaction. But he couldn't live as a recluse forever. That night, instead of heading home, he attended a party Ed had begged him to join. The large house was nearly a mansion, with cars lining the driveway and street. Henry parked a block away and texted Ed, who met him at the door. Nervous but smiling, Ed guided him inside to keep him from leaving. The house was packed with people laughing, watching a baseball game, playing volleyball, eating barbecue, and drinking beer. Ed introduced Henry to friends and new faces. To his surprise, Henry found himself enjoying the conversations and even felt confident talking to the women there. While playing pool with Ed in the recreation room, Henry wandered off when Ed left to grab a beer. He eventually ended up in the media room, where he ran into Buddy Crawford, an old classmate. "Hey, Henry. Long time no see. Want some chips? There's barbecue outside too," Buddy offered. "No, I'm fine," Henry replied, nodding toward the TV. "What are you watching?" "We just saw the Cubs lose in extra innings," Buddy said, rolling his eyes. "Now it's a movie. When it's done, we'll hook up the Xbox. Join us?" Henry nodded vaguely, standing behind the crowded couch as the movie played. His chest tightened when he recognized The Graduate. Watching the final scenes, where Benjamin disrupts Elaine's wedding and they run away together, made him pale and breathless. The group sprawled across the floor and couches laughed, shouting Elaine, along with the iconic scene. Feeling nauseous, Henry bent over, clutching his lap. A concerned woman touched his arm. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. Embarrassed, Henry shook his head and left without a word. Ed knocked hesitantly on Henry's apartment door, waiting a moment before knocking louder. Henry answered, looking tired and unkempt, dressed in old shorts and a faded t-shirt. "Hey, Ed. What's up?" he asked, stepping aside to let him in before heading to the living room. Ed hesitated but followed. "Sorry to barge in, man. I just wanted to check on you after the party last week. I'm really sorry about the whole movie thing," he said, trying to sound sincere. "You don't need to apologize, it wasn't your fault," Henry replied indifferently as he slumped onto the couch. Ed perched on the edge of the couch, leaning forward. "I was worried about you. I thought we should talk," he said earnestly. "Talk about what?" Henry asked, his exhaustion clear. Ed's voice softened. "You need to move forward, Henry. I know you've been through a rough patch, but you've got to start living your life again." Henry's frustration bubbled over. "Easy for you to say. I was betrayed by the one person I trusted most. How do you just move on from that? Do you even know what that feels like?" he snapped, his anger sharp. Ed raised his hands, staying calm. "You're right, I don't know what that feels like. But as your friend, I'm telling you that you can get through this. It's going to take time and courage, but it's possible," he said steadily. Henry let out a bitter laugh. "So now I'm a coward because I got dumped?" "No," Ed said firmly. "I'm saying your life is in your hands. You can stay isolated, or you can start something new. The choice is yours." Henry rubbed his face, his anger giving way to weariness. "I don't even know where to start," he admitted, his voice low. Ed smirked and pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "Well, I might have an answer for that," he said, handing it to Henry, who opened it cautiously. Henry squinted at the list. "What is this?" "It's a list of women who would love to go out with you," Ed replied. "Just give one of them a call." Henry scoffed. "I've done that before. It didn't exactly work out." "Then it's time to do better," Ed encouraged. "I don't think I can," Henry muttered, his voice tinged with doubt. Ed smiled knowingly and pulled out his phone. "I figured you'd say that, so I have backup." He pressed a button, and Simon Drake's voice came through the speaker. "Henry, I know you've been through hell with all that marriage crap. I get why you're jaded, but you've got to grab life by the horns and move on. You're too smart and talented to waste away like this. Ed has a list of great women you can meet. You don't need to get serious, just enjoy yourself for once. You've got too much ahead of you to stay in this self-imposed prison." Henry sat silently on the couch, staring at the list on the coffee table. Ed waited for a response before finally breaking the silence. "Well?" Henry blinked, snapping out of his daze. "Well, what?" Ed sighed. "You need to get your act together. Ask one of these girls out and start living." After a pause, Henry nodded. "Yeah," he said. Ed raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Wait, did you just say you're going to call one of them?" "That's what I said," Henry replied more confidently. "My dad's right." "You're right. I need to move forward." Ed grinned. "All right then." Without overthinking it, Henry started at the top of the list. The first woman was a tall, graceful former ballerina with straight brown hair who worked as a buyer for a clothing store and enjoyed tennis. They had dinner at an Italian restaurant and went to see a play. While the evening was polite, it felt stilted, ending with an awkward kiss on the cheek and apologies on both sides. Henry spent the night tossing and turning, but the next morning, he called the second name. She was a short, perky redhead who worked at a veterinary clinic and loved dancing and skating. Their first date involved sandwiches at a cafe, a lively dance club, and coffee at a diner. The conversation flowed easily, touching on light topics, but neither brought up personal romantic histories, likely at Ed's suggestion. They went out 4 more times over the next 2 months, but despite the ease between them, there was no real spark. Henry let the connection fade naturally. The third woman was a free spirit with light brown hair, laughing eyes, and tan skin. She worked as a research assistant and loved motorcycles, loud music, and smoking pot. Their date involved a rock concert, after which she invited him back to her apartment. The heavy smell of smoke and the constant Grateful Dead music made Henry uncomfortable, and he left early. Back home, he washed his clothes twice and took a shower, wondering if secondhand smoke could make him fail a drug test. Girl number 4 resembled Marilyn Monroe, with short platinum blonde hair. She was a saleswoman, lived at home, and had few interests. Henry managed to hold a conversation during their tedious dinner, but when she invited him in for a drink, he politely declined. The next few dates were with women who were fun but unremarkable. They had good conversations and went on second, third, and even fourth dates, but Henry never felt a real connection. He worried the love he'd shared with Layla had been a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Then he met Sila Rawson. Sila was a 28-year-old University of Ohio graduate with a marketing degree, working in advertising. She had shoulder-length ash blonde hair and a heart-shaped face. Her brother, who worked with Ed, had recommended her. Initially, Sila declined Henry's call, but after reconsidering, she agreed to meet him. Their first date was at a cozy downtown cafe. The conversation started awkwardly but soon grew lighter and more spontaneous. They shared stories and laughed, losing track of time. Henry was late returning to the office but couldn't resist calling her the next afternoon to set up another date. The following night, they dined at an upscale steakhouse. Though they had planned to see a movie afterward, they missed it due to their engrossing conversation. Dessert stretched into hours, and when the waiter finally asked them to leave, they moved to a nearby bar to continue talking. They discussed everything, from clothing preferences to travel dreams, to their favorite sports teams. One day, during a light-hearted conversation about pop culture, the topic turned to the Parent Trap. Henry mentioned Lindsay Lohan, prompting Sila to groan dramatically. "God, Lindsay Lohan, I hate her." Surprised, Henry asked, "Why? What's so bad about her?" Sila sighed. "It's not her, exactly. It's a Disney remake of The Parent Trap. I irrationally blame her for it." Henry laughed. "You hate her because of a movie?" Sila squinted at him, clearly irritated. "No. Sort of. Okay, yes. I really hated that movie," she admitted. Curious, Henry pressed, "How can a Disney movie be that bad?" Sila leaned forward with a mock glare. "You're going to make me explain, aren't you?" "Yes," Henry said, grinning. She sighed. "The movie's about twins trying to reunite their parents by playing horrible tricks on their dad's fiancée. Everyone loved it because the parents got back together, but I relate to the fiancée. She just wanted to marry the guy she loved, and these kids sabotaged her. Sure, the movie paints her as a gold digger, but she wasn't. Henry tilted his head thoughtfully. Why do you care so much about that? Sila's voice softened. You don't know, do you? No, Henry admitted, confused. Sila hesitated, then sighed. I thought Ed or my brother told you about Paul. Paul? Of course. You mentioned him once, Henry said, nodding. Things were serious, right? Yes. He was older, divorced, with a teenage daughter, Ava. She wanted her parents to get back together. The divorce was rough on her, Sila said, taking a sip of her drink. So when Paul and I got serious, Ava tried to sabotage our relationship. Her voice carried a hint of bitterness. She pulled a parent trap on me, pranks to make me look bad. Henry leaned forward, intrigued. Okay, now you have to tell me about the pranks. Sila laughed, shaking her head. Buckle up, she said, setting down her glass. The first one happened when I was meeting his business associates. Ava handed me my perfume as we were leaving, but she'd added something horrible to it. I didn't realize it until Paul leaned in to smell my neck and gagged. I had to scrub myself in the restroom, but I still reeked. It was humiliating. Henry suppressed a laugh. That's awful, he said, trying to sound sympathetic. Oh, please. Feel sympathy, Sila replied sarcastically. She didn't stop there. She washed my underwear in the same stuff, put garlic capsules in my vitamins, and spiked my spritzer. I told Paul, but he stayed quiet. I always wondered if he thought I just smelled bad. Henry leaned closer and mock sniffed. Well, I'm not picking up anything now, he joked. Sila rolled her eyes, fake frowning, before continuing. Another time, she smeared fly pheromones on me before a picnic with friends. Within minutes, I was swarmed by flies. I begged Paul to talk to her, but he brushed it off. That one almost broke us. I couldn't trust her, and the paranoia was exhausting. Henry's wide eyes mirrored his shock. Almost broke you? What finally happened? The last straw was a dinner party with Paul's parents and his clients. Ava slipped a sedative, probably Ativan, into my wine. By the end of dinner, I was slurring my words and passed out on my plate. To top it off, she somehow made it look like I wet myself. Paul had to carry me to bed, mortified. You're kidding me, Henry said, incredulous. Nope. Paul was embarrassed by my behavior and got defensive when I blamed Ava. That fight ended our relationship. I realized I didn't have his support and couldn't deal with her on my own. Sila leaned back, shaking her head. Straight out of Disney, huh? More like Twisted Disney, Henry retorted. That's my story, Sila said, smiling despite herself. How about yours? Henry leaned back, his voice low. Mine's more like a runaway bride. Sila's curiosity piqued. Did she leave you at the last minute? No, she left me for an old flame at the wedding. I was in my tux, ready to go, and she walked in, said it was over, and left. His voice carried the sting of lingering hurt. God, that's awful, Sila said, her tone soft. Yeah. My dad nearly caused a scene, called her a witch, and started yelling at the guests. It was chaos, Henry admitted, shaking his head at the memory. What did you do? Sila asked gently. I just walked away like a zombie. It was a mess. Honestly, this is the first time I've been able to laugh about it. It feels so far away now, Henry said, his expression softening. Time does that, Sila mused. Time helps, sure. But mostly, it's because of you, Henry said warmly. They left the bar holding hands, and Henry opened the car door for Sila. As they sat, he nervously said, I had a great time tonight. Maybe you'd like to spend more time together. We could go to my place. It's nearby. Sila turned to stare out the window, and Henry's heart sank. I'm sorry, he added quickly. I didn't mean to embarrass you. We haven't known each other that long. Sila turned back to him with a decisive smile. Yes. I'd like to go to your apartment. 15 minutes later, Henry opened the door to his apartment. Here it is, he said, immediately regretting how bland it sounded. Sila stepped inside, looking around before turning to him with a tense expression. Henry, she said softly, just take me to the bedroom. Henry swallowed hard, nodding. Later that night, Henry woke up to find Sila lying beside him, smiling in the dim light. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi yourself. Can't sleep?" Henry asked. "No. I woke up a while ago and started thinking," Sila replied. "About what?" "I'm not sure what I should say." "A girl shouldn't always reveal her plans," Sila teased. Henry raised an eyebrow. "Plans? What plans?" "I'm going to make you mine," she said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Henry froze for a moment, then smiled. "You've made a good start," he murmured, gazing into her eyes. Their relationship blossomed into a whirlwind romance full of new experiences. They quickly got engaged, planning a perfect wedding without drama or resentment. For a while, Henry's worries about his past seemed to disappear. Everything felt right, until Sila casually mentioned that Paul wanted to attend their wedding and some pre-wedding events. "He just wants to wish me well," she said lightly. "I told him it was okay." Henry felt uneasy but tried to rationalize it. Sila was just being polite. But when Paul arrived, it was clear he still had feelings for her. He frequently pulled Sila aside for private conversations, touched her arm too often, and acted as if they were still a couple. Sila, to Henry's frustration, never firmly told him to stop. Less than 10 months after meeting Sila, Henry found himself at their rehearsal dinner, gripped by a familiar sense of impending doom. Paul, charming and confident, captivated the guests, especially Sila, who seemed unable to look away from him. Henry barely touched his food, feeling increasingly anxious and isolated. Finally, as he rubbed his temples, muttering in frustration, Sila noticed. "Are you okay? You look upset," she asked. Henry glared at her and hissed angrily, "Damn it, Sila. If you're going to destroy me, why not just use a knife?" Sila's eyes widened. "What? What's wrong, Henry?" "Come on, Sila. I've been here before. You invited your ex to our rehearsal without asking me. You have secrets, private conversations, and you can't stop looking at him. I know how this ends. Maybe we should switch places," Henry said bitterly. Sila leaned in, shaking her head vigorously. "No, Henry. I didn't invite him, he invited himself. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd be mad." "Mad? Mad about what? A last-minute tryst?" Henry demanded, his voice rising. "Stop," Sila said firmly, her tone becoming resolute as her panic faded. "This isn't what you think." Henry raised an eyebrow. "Then explain." Sila hesitated before taking a deliberate breath. "Just wait a couple of minutes, you'll see." At that moment, one of the women Paul had been charming exclaimed loudly, "What's that on your teeth? Is that juice?" Sila smiled triumphantly at Henry. "Or maybe you won't have to wait after all," she said smugly. Henry turned toward the commotion, annoyance giving way to confusion. Paul was still smiling, but his teeth and lips were stained a deep blue, with streaks dripping down his chin. "What the hell is that?" Henry asked, his eyes wide. "What did you do?" "We're not done yet," Sila replied nonchalantly, watching as Paul frantically dabbed at his face with a napkin. The blue dye only smeared further, and his confident demeanor crumbled as his expression turned from irritation to panic. As Paul realized he was stuck to the chair, he grabbed a pocket knife and began sawing at his pants to free himself. The polite murmurs of the crowd turned into outright laughter as he finally stood with a loud tearing sound, his clothes in shambles. His face flushed, Paul rushed to the restroom, his appearance now resembling that of a corporate clown. "Oh my God, that's cruel, and incredibly funny," Henry said, turning to Sila, who was watching the spectacle with smug amusement. "Yes, it was," she replied nonchalantly. "Especially the last part, I didn't see that coming." Henry leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "What do you mean you didn't see it coming? Didn't you plan this?" "It wasn't just me," Sila admitted with a grin. "I had a partner in crime." "A partner?" Henry asked, eyebrows raised. "Yes," Sila said, nodding toward the far end of the table, where Henry saw his father, Simon, grinning ear to ear. Simon raised his wine glass and a toast, looking utterly pleased with himself. "Oh my God," Henry laughed. "What have I gotten myself into?" "I don't know," Sila teased, slipping her arm around his. "What did you get yourself into?" "Heaven," Henry replied with a smirk. "Heaven, I guess." Layla parked her beat-up car under a shady tree, wiped the sweat from her forehead, and cursed the broken air conditioner. She stepped out and walked up the driveway of the duplex, passing a tiny patch of brown grass and a sprinkler lying in pieces. Unlocking the screen door, she entered the living room, where a fan was blowing warm air on her husband, who was napping on the couch. She slammed the door shut, jolting Eric awake. "Hey, babe," Eric said groggily, rubbing his disheveled hair. "What time is it?" Layla glanced around the cluttered room. Empty pizza boxes, uneaten cereal, socks, papers, and a video game console sat scattered across the space. A country song hummed softly on the radio. "It's 4:30, Eric," she replied, standing near the fan. "Did you interview for any jobs today?" Eric sat up, stretching lazily. "How was I supposed to go to interviews when you had the truck?" Layla planted her hands on her hips, raising an eyebrow. "You could have looked online, filled out forms, made calls. It's been 6 months, and we're out of money. Have you done anything?" Eric sighed. "Yeah, I checked online, but it's all crap." "Maybe working a crappy job for a while won't kill you," Layla suggested, her tone sharp. "Maybe not being a nagging witch won't kill you either," Eric snapped. Layla's face fell, and she blinked rapidly, covering her mouth. Eric's expression softened, and he stood to hug her. "I'm sorry, Layla. I didn't mean it," he whispered. "I just don't want to settle for some job that doesn't pay enough." He pulled back and looked her in the eyes. "Stick with me, okay? There's a new dealership opening on the west side. I'm eyeing a spot there. We'll be fine, just give me some space and time." Layla sighed, nodding reluctantly. "Okay, Eric. I'm just stressed. My accounting job barely covers anything, and we have no savings. We need a second income." "I know, Layla. I'll get it. Soon. Don't worry." They exchanged half-smiles before Layla walked over to a small alcove with a desk and a computer. She turned it on and started paying bills. After a few minutes, curiosity got the better of her, and she checked the browsing history. One lonely job search was buried under a pile of sports pages and YouTube videos. She glanced at Eric, who was pulling a stale slice of pizza from a box on the coffee table. "Want some?" he offered. Layla shook her head. "No. I'm going out with the girls tonight. Remember?" "Oh yeah," Eric said, nodding as he chewed. "Don't spend too much money." "I won't," Layla assured him. She smiled warmly, and Eric grinned back before focusing on his pizza. Layla watched him for a moment, seeing him not as a man but as a boy trapped in an adult's body. Her gaze drifted to a wooden box on the shelf. She opened it and pulled out an opal pendant, holding it with a dreamy expression. The smile faded as she heard Eric swearing at his video game. She frowned, bit her lip, and lifted a piece of felt-covered cardboard in the box to reveal a beautiful gold ring with a diamond. She admired it briefly before putting it back. Turning to the computer, she opened a file of photos saved over a decade. The pictures showed Henry at business events, on his honeymoon in Hawaii, and with his family in front of a gorgeous home. Her phone rang, snapping her out of her thoughts. "Hello?" Layla answered. "Hi. Birthday girl, are you ready for the Bachelorette party?" Valerie Caldwell's cheerful voice chirped through the line. Layla hesitated. "Yeah, Valerie. I don't know. Our budget is tight, and, oh no." "No excuses," Valerie interrupted. "It's your birthday present from all of us. You're not paying a dime. The whole gang will be there, except Brittany." "Why can't Brittany come?" Layla asked. "She picked up a second job. Husband's back in rehab," Valerie explained. Layla sighed. "Oh. I didn't know. Yeah, it sucks, but tonight's about you. Don't be late, or we'll miss the start of the show," Valerie warned. "The show?" Layla asked, confused. "Yeah, it's a Jennifer Lawrence romantic comedy. It starts at 7, so we need time to eat first," Valerie replied enthusiastically. Layla bit her lip. "Is that the only option?" "There's a Tarantino Western, but that's about it," Valerie said, her tone clearly disapproving of the Western. Layla snorted. "I think maybe I should watch the Western." Valerie laughed. "Really? I didn't know you liked Westerns." Layla glanced at Eric, engrossed in his video game amidst the mess, then back at the picture of Henry and his perfect family. Her voice was quiet, tinged with regret. It's not that I like westerns, Valerie. It's that I ain't really into romantic comedy.